Everyone. It is just after 10 on the Saturday after Election Day. We appreciate people joining in. Our guest today is Pat Nolan, who has been a longtime commentator on our local news stations basically, I think when we get lost, we just want to know kind of what's going on. We turn to Pat and hopefully he tries to explain what's going on. So Pat, welcome. We're glad you're on the show.
Hi, Jim. Glad to be here.
Well, and have you, did you catch up on your sleep? You were at the council meeting the other night, and we actually got out of there, I think, a little later than I thought we would, but it still was about 11 o'clock.
Yeah, the council's been, since they've moved down to the Music City Center, you have not burned the midnight oil. You've managed to get done before midnight, before you came down to the Music City Center. I don't know if it's because they're all together in person. I kind of think that helps, or if it's because you have more space down there. But the meetings have seemed to have gone a lot smoother, although I don't think I've ever seen a relatively minor rule change get debated for 15 minutes the way it was the other night, and that wasn't on the agenda, but it worked out. But this council does like to debate.
It does like to debate, and it likes to, you know, when we were meeting virtually, the meetings would run for a very long time. I think our average was about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
And,
I was losing sleep then.
Yeah, I think we all were losing sleep. So when you bring them back together into one room, even though it's the Music City ballroom, the chairs are not as comfortable as they are at home. So that may be a little known fact. Their ballroom chairs are banquet chairs. And the idea is that they're not as comfortable at home where they can, you know, look professional from the top, but be wearing pajama bottoms
Yeah.
and drink coffee and sit on their couch. So
it's a little hard to hear some of the members because they speak with their masks on. We're all wearing masks. We're in a metro building. And when we did the virtual things, a lot of the council members were at home. They spoke through their computers. Now, there were some systems issues. People couldn't quite stay on the system. They kept getting knocked off the system. The voting system was non-existent, basically. At least now you have a voting system that works. If you don't have to take a roll call every time you're doing everything. And all those things kind of add up. And I think that's one of the reasons the meetings lasted quite as long as they did. It tended to elongate a lot of things. And then I thought a few times the council I think the way they were holding the meetings kind of depersonalized everything. And sometimes I think the debate, some things were said during debate that probably wouldn't have been said in a face-to-face situation.
Well, and again, that was one of the reasons was you bring them back together. It's a little harder to say things about another individual when you're standing there in the same room. So we're hoping that kind of get back to a routine. We're in the Music City Center until at least through the end of December, and then we'll see where we go from there. We're doing it almost one meeting at a time. Councilmember Tanya Hancock is on today, letting you know that. We may have some other council members joining us. Let me tell you the latest numbers. We had 89 new cases in Davidson County as of today. 4 additional deaths, which brings the total to 321 since this pandemic started. Active cases have dropped. It's now at 2,148 active cases. And one of the things that we keep an eye on is this percentage of ICU beds that are available. It's at 12%. Anyway, lots of stuff going on. Obviously, this week has been pretty hectic with everything going on, and then a national election. And I was telling Pat before we started that usually my first question is, you know, even though Pat's been around for a while, tell us a little bit about yourself. We're not asking that today. Okay. The first question is, what is going on? Tell us from your perspective. You know, we all get up in the morning going like, okay, has it been called yet? Where are these extra votes? From your best perspective, what is going on? You know, is it we just have to wait a little longer? When do you think we'll know for sure?
Well, I keep thinking every day we're going to at least have some of the states that are undecided called. I'm not sure that's one of the problems. Is now some of the states have done most of their counting, but you start to get into the provisional ballots and things like that. And that takes a little time to decide whether those are going to be counted or not, because you got to figure out what they did. Did they vote in another place? What did they do wrong? Is that fixable? So those take time to do. The biggest problem that this is, well, I guess there's two reasons this is as long a process as it's been. We've had a record turnout. I think I saw this morning that we had voted 66% nationwide of all the registered voters. Now, that's the largest single raw number ever in terms of voters. It's the biggest percentage turnout since 1900. But of course, we didn't have nearly as many people or registered voters in 1900, which I think is when McKinley was reelected, and not long after, unfortunately, was assassinated. But so we've had this turnout, and that's true here in Tennessee too. We had this huge turnout, and so therefore there are more votes to count. And then you've got the pandemic on top of that, which has changed the mix of how the vote came in. We had a much larger early vote and much larger, particularly absentee by mail vote, 2% to 7% in Tennessee. That made a difference. There are more votes there to count. And in a lot of states, including several of the battleground states, the election officials asked, but were not allowed by the legislature in that state to start the preparation to count those mail-in votes and early votes early, so that they'd be ready to start doing the actual count for them on election night. So that meant, that's why we're still 4 or 5 days later trying to figure out what they did, because it's just so many when you get into the millions, and that's what they've had. So that's why it's a little late. And I mean, we're certainly well below how long it took just to decide in Florida for 2000. So this has happened, at least that's the last time I remember it happening to this extent. And of course, now this is not just one state, it's 5 or 6 states. But I think the process has worked pretty well. I think, considering that we're in the middle of a pandemic, this election has gone remarkably pretty well, as best I can tell. And I think that's true both in Tennessee and here in Nashville, although there were some problems in Tennessee with some of the lawsuits that went on. And after a while, you almost needed a scorecard to know what state you were in and what was being sued and what the state law was, because it's different. We have one presidential election, but we have it in about 50 different states with about 50 different rules.
Well, let me ask you a question. I was watching one of the stations on, this must have been Tuesday night, and one of the questions, they brought in an historian. And the question was, is this something new, that it takes so long, or is this something that's been around for a while? And, we're not that old of a country. And when you think back, we didn't have the technology back in the 1900 or, whenever. My guess is it did take a little while. We're so, it's like, tell us right now, as soon as the polls close, I want to know who wins.
I went back and did some research on Andrew Jackson, just because I wanted to put something up on my Facebook page about it, since he's the first Tennessean elected to the presidency. And of course, being elected in 1828 was very different than today. The elections in the various states took over a longer period of time, and the word didn't get back to some cities. I mean, for example, I was reading about James K. Polk. When he was nominated, he was the 9th ballot in the Democratic National Convention that year, but it took about 4 or 5 days before the word even got to Nashville that he'd been nominated, in part because it just took that long for it to do. And the same thing was somewhat true, I think, what I read on the Wikipedia, so it may not be completely correct. I think the election went on from like November 10th, November 1st to November 12th that year. So it went over several days. Now, given our current situation, we'd all be going nuts over 12 days to try to figure out what the heck was going on. But that was the way it was done. And of course, one of the reasons we used to inaugurate presidents in March was that it took that long to get everybody to get up there. And usually the Electoral College thing has always been held in December or early January. And of course, it's held in the states, and then the final thing is actually approved by Congress, and that's when the election becomes official. And that'll probably be happening in early January. Of course, they don't exactly know how the Senate's going to organize itself yet, because depending on when they hold that, they may not have all the members, because Georgia's got 2 senatorial races, and they won't be held until about the 10th of January. So it's going to be a little odd this year. Now, fortunately, none of this is going into the House. So that has happened a couple of times. It happened in 1800. It happened in 1824 when Jackson didn't win, and John Quincy Adams did, because Henry Clay helped him and became Secretary of State. It happened in 1876, which is a little bit like this, in that the dispute was down in some southern states, and you had 2 different sets of election returns come in, and the Congress had to decide, the House had to decide which one to take. They actually formed a special commission with the Chief Justice and others on there to decide, and they gave the election to the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes, who turned out to have a nickname from there on known as Rutherford. Although there were some things that were not good about that election too for Tilden, but that was probably the most contentious one that went in the House. Although every time it's gone in the House, it's been contentious. Well, I don't think we've been in the House since then, but of course, we almost got close, I guess, with the Bush-Gore situation.
Well, so based upon what you're saying, it doesn't seem like you're that surprised that it's taking this long, or are you?
Well, no, I mean, even in Florida with that one state, it took them several weeks to figure out what were the right votes, and it finally got decided in the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court said the Florida Supreme Court was making up some new rules after the legislature. Only the legislature could set what the rules for the election were, and they said the Supreme Court was doing that and it had gone too far, and so they stopped the vote. Of course, Democrats have a different view of that. And that's one of the reasons it's kind of hard to know how this will go. If the president seems to desperately want to get something to the Supreme Court, but I'm not quite sure what I've seen some of the cases he's brought already in the courts in Michigan and places like that. Of course, most of those haven't been thrown out at this point. But several of those were just for more access to be able to see the vote being counted. That wouldn't actually change the outcome of the votes. The idea of stopping the votes has not gone anywhere in any of the states, and I'm not quite sure why it would or how it could, unless he's got something out there that we haven't seen. Now, Lindsey Graham the other night when he came out to defend the president said within 24 hours or 48 hours we would see some information coming out that would show some kind of vast voter fraud. Well, it's been over 48 hours and I ain't seen anything yet.
Yeah. Based upon at least what you've seen, what you've heard, do you have any idea when you think this will be over? I know that North Carolina's still got some votes out there that they have to wait on, but Pennsylvania looks close. So one of the questions, maybe I'll rephrase the question.
Okay.
I know that the networks are being very careful about calling a state, but we're at the point now where it's 4 days past the election. You've got 99% of the vote in on some of the states. Do you think they're gonna wait until they are at 100% just to be sure?
I think in the very, very close stage, and that also includes Georgia, I believe they may wait. If it's within the realm of a recount, I think they may defer to not do anything and let the recount take place. Although I will tell you that the larger the Biden margin gets, and it's gotten larger in both Georgia and in Pennsylvania, if it continues to grow but stays within the amount of time that the recount is either required or allowed under law, I think the networks will be careful about that. They're already quite nervous that the AP, which is considered to be the gold standard in calling these races over the years, and that Fox News have both called Arizona for Biden, even though that race has probably gotten tighter for the president than any of the others have. I just think, given the fact that the overall polling in this race did not turn out to be accurate, I mean, they may have picked the right winner as opposed to 2016 when they picked Hillary Clinton to win by a large majority, and she didn't win at all. Whereas this time they picked Biden by an even larger majority, and he didn't make the majority, but looks like he's going to continue to what may turn out to be a fairly okay over 300 electoral votes out of the total amount that are out there. I think he could do pretty well with that. I think they're gun shy, and I guess I wouldn't blame them. They don't need another whoops or a problem, because the polls were worse this time than they were last time, at least in terms of the margins they predicted.
So we got a number of questions over the week about polling. And, you know, for a long time, everybody just watched the polls and they seem to be right. And what's happened is what's happened to polls? Are they, you know, so I remember in 2016 and it's like, what's going on? And then now you watch the polls this time, and I kind of thought going in that because of the concerns in 2016, they would be overly cautious on their polls and oversample and make sure that they were right.
Well, they said they were good. That's what they said they were trying to be. Obviously, whatever they tried didn't work the way they thought it was going to work. They may still continue to be undersampling what would have been the Trump voter, particularly the white non-college educated voter. It may be a phenomenon of just Donald Trump attracts a different group of voters than others do. And because in 2018, when they did the midterm elections, their projections on what was going to happen in the House and the Senate turned out to be remarkably accurate. I'm not sure it's going to be as simple as it's because of Donald Trump, but that's the bottom line seems to be from looking around at stories in the media and other places. Nobody really knows exactly what it is. It may be in part that some people have kind of made the polls into not just snapshots, which is all they are. And like any snapshot, you can be in one position here and a totally different position within a couple of seconds after that. And I think polls can change like that, although they don't normally radically change a lot unless there's something else going on within the electorate or within the news. I think people are making it more predictive. They see these polls and they think, well, that's what's going to happen on election day. And that may or may not be true. Remember that when you look at polls, no matter what they are based on the electorate being a certain way. There's so much white vote, so much black vote, so much women, so many men, so many college educated, non-college educated, all that kind of thing. And if that mix is off, particularly in a race like this, when it's already going to be close in a lot of cases in some of these states, and every one of the states that's still in dispute was considered a battleground state. We don't have a state that's suddenly close that everybody thought, all the other states that were decided, everybody kind of thought that's where they were going to be. It may just be we're going to have to back off a little bit about taking polls as the holy grail. Maybe they'll continue to get better at it in terms of that, but I don't think it'll ever be perfect. And I'd have to say, anytime you have basically a tie election in a lot of states, it's going to be contentious and it's going to be tough to predict because so many things can make it change quickly.
So let's stay with polls for a minute, or let's stay with just the general attitude. It seemed like going into the election, it looked like on those battleground states, Biden was ahead in a number of them. It may have been close, reasonable margin of error, but it looked like he was going to be ahead. And the question was, if he wins some of those, he'll win. Now, as it turns out, Pennsylvania and Georgia flip right at as they're still waiting for the votes to come in. It goes from Trump to Biden. So those polls actually may end up being correct at the end result.
Yeah, you saw was the national polling showed him up 8-10 points. Well, that looked funny to me at the beginning of it before we had election day. He's not going to do that, so therefore it made the battleground states, which look closer in a lot of places within the margin for error, made them look even closer, and that's what happened. I think we're going to find at the end of the day the 2016 polls were off so much in 2 or 3 states it cost Hillary Clinton the election. In this case, it was off more overall, even outside the margin for error. But Biden managed to eke it out primarily because his support in some of those states still remained strong enough that he could eke it out as close as it got. We didn't have he rebuilt the blue wall, and at least he will have completely rebuilt it if he carries Pennsylvania. And it wound up, he eked it through, but everybody was, again, expecting it's supposed to be at a certain amount. I don't think the polls are ever going to be accurate enough that they'll be able to call it to the point. Now, Nate Silver, who does the 538 website, sort of cemented his national reputation because in 2012, he picked every state correctly. Now, I don't know if he picked the margin in every state correctly, but he picked every state correctly now. And actually, this time, he's probably not going to be too far off from that because, as best I can tell, Trump lost some states he won before, but he didn't lose any states that he was predicted to win. And Biden didn't lose any states that he was predicted to win in, I don't think. I think all the states that he's winning are states that went for Trump in 2016, and those are the ones that he's flipped. There's been no Democratic states flipped to Trump this time. So it wasn't a complete fruit basket turnover, but it makes it a little hard to take those numbers and say, oh, gee, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Well, it's almost become, it's like, okay, so the next election, is it just going to be just the rest of us don't even need to vote because, Tennessee was probably called last year before, we even got into this thing. It's almost as if there's about 7 or 8 states that almost control this entire election. It was the battleground states, and very few, as you said, Trump won the states, we knew he was going to win, and Biden won the states that we knew he was going to win. And it was like, okay, let's all focus on those particular states that are close.
Well, it's been that way the last couple of cycles, or several cycles. As a matter of fact, I was looking at an article this morning that back in the late 70s or late 60s and early 70s, Birch Bayh, who was in the Senate at the time, actually got the House to pass. He couldn't get it through the Senate, basically a constitutional amendment, which is what it's going to take to get rid of the Electoral College. He got that done, but he couldn't get it through the Senate primarily because at that time Strom Thurmond and other Southern Democrats didn't want it to pass, and they used the filibuster to do it. In those days, the filibuster was a lot stronger instrument than it is today. There'd be some people talking about doing that again. That's obviously a long and will be controversial process. It may be, although this would make it even crazier, but you mentioned Tennessee. If Tennessee had a proportional system, the way they have in Nebraska and in Maine, there might be 2 congressional districts in Tennessee that might give an electoral vote to a Democrat, and that would be the 5th district here in Nashville and Steve Cohen's district down in Memphis. And that may not be true the next presidential election, because a pretty good chance that the 5th district here in Nashville is going to be cut up into Swiss cheese, and that's going to be a Republican district. So chances are, if you change that in Tennessee, the Democrats might have 8 to, might be behind 8-1. But notice the difference, because the candidates did go campaign in Maine and in Nebraska, and Biden got an electoral vote in Nebraska, and Trump got one in Maine, and that helps to some degree to keep from getting that 269 to 269 deadlock, which is still not impossible, but I think Trump has to win just about everything, and Biden win one of the smaller states. It's still a dispute. So you can do that kind of change. I'm beginning to change my mind about it, because I think this country has changed from a country when we first were founded, where we were a union of states with an electorate that was made up mostly of white men who had property, no women, no blacks. That's a very different electorate today. We are more of a union of people, and states are a lesser importance. The Electoral College rewards states, and that supposedly is supposed to be so that the larger states don't dominate. And you can make a case for some of that. I mean, the vote in California is probably going to wind up making up, even for Biden, close to half of his margin in the Electoral College. He's going to have about a 3-point margin, and maybe 4. And a good bit of that's going to come from the margins he's going to win in California and in New York and maybe some other states that are.
Yeah, you're talking about the overall popular vote.
If we don't do electoral vote, we'll be doing it by a popular vote.
So tell me a little bit about Maine and Nebraska. Why do they do that there, and why do other states not do it? I mean, is that?
Well, I haven't been a part of the debates or watched that. I mean, the feeling is that what they do is whoever wins the state overall gets 2, because that would mark the 2 senators that you get, which is part of your electoral vote. Your electoral vote comes from your 2 senators and how many congressmen you've got. And they take the rest of the congressional districts, and based on the number of congressional districts you have, you elect you give an electoral vote for each congressional district a candidate carries. Now I think that would make it a little bit easier to make more of the country competitive in theory. Now there's got to be a limit to that. You still have people going to states that have the most electoral votes, and where they already know, looking on the congressional delegation, where a Democrat has a chance to pick up a district and where they don't. And the same thing for the Republicans. So it might be good. It might kind of scramble the eggs a little bit too. I'm sure nobody will think it's a perfect system, but I am somewhat, I do keep in mind that everybody else in the world does their elections by popular vote. Nobody does it based on some kind of system that came out of the late 18th century and may have actually been put together in part to protect the South. One of the several things that went into the Constitution, like counting black people as 3/5, slaves as 3/5 of a person, that we wouldn't keep in our it may still be in our Constitution, but it's not operative given what's happened since that time. Maybe it's time to look about that for the Electoral College. But we're so divided right now in this country. I think if we did that, it would only further divisions for right now, because we can't agree on what time of day is right now, much less we're going to change something as major as that would be in our election system.
Well, that's partly because we changed our times last Sunday, and now every time I go into my bathroom, the clock is wrong, and it's like I have no idea what time it is. What happened to the? I'm going to go back to the divided question in a minute, but the blue wall, not the blue wall, but this blue tidal wave that was supposed to be coming. That they said in 2016 it was coming, and it didn't. And then this time it was like, okay, so you're going to see, the Senate switch. That didn't happen. The House lost some seats to Republicans. That blue wave didn't come. And so it was sort of like, what happened?
That may have been the biggest goof by the pollsters. I mean, they obviously were predicting that the House was going to pick up 10 or 15 seats. They were predicting that the Democrats were maybe going to pick up enough seats maybe to get up to a 2 or 3 seat margin in the Senate. That's not going to happen. It looks at this point like the Democrats may be able to get up to have a tie in the Senate. And if Kamala Harris becomes the vice president and therefore the presiding officer, that would give the Democrats the ability to have to organize, and I guess make Chuck Schumer the majority leader. I don't know, except that the reason I'm going to say this, and this may have been part of it, but it happened so late, I'm not sure. It may have been as people heard that the Democrats were going to take over the White House, the Senate, and increase their margins in the House. They began to sort of go back to what they've done for many years, which is they don't like one party having control of everything. And so therefore NBC, I just see what said NBC just called the race. Which state did they call? I haven't seen that, but
so I'm checking. So CNN and NBC have just called the race. They've just, both of them.
They must have projected a state then. And it could have been any one of the 5, just about, except maybe Alaska.
So I'm looking, it's not the story. Let's see. So they just called Pennsylvania for Biden.
Well, that would put him over, and then some.
I think that I'm double checking. Let's
okay.
see. Well, so I'm looking at the map, and they've now got Pennsylvania completely blue.
Okay, well,
and they've got, yeah.
To finish my thought about what I said before, I think people like to have divided government. They like to have that, what they would consider to be checks and balances. And in other words, the House can do one thing, the Senate can stop what the House is doing, and the House can stop what the Senate's doing, and the president has to figure out a way to make the two of them work together and get something done. And I think they like that. And we've had both parties have that for about a 2-year period. Obama had it in his first 2 years, and Trump had it in his first 2 years. And I suspect the voters changed it within the 2 years after it happened. So obviously they weren't necessarily crazy about the results.
So it's, I'm just looking at NBC. Joe Biden became president-elect Saturday after winning Pennsylvania and its 20 electoral college votes. So this is NBC has called Pennsylvania.
Okay. Well, we'll see if anybody else follows suit on that. I mean, if I was Biden, I might wait just a little bit longer to make sure it's not just completely one element of the mainstream media doing it. But how interesting from a historical point of view that Pennsylvania is known as the Keystone State, and that's what it became for Joe Biden, the Keystone State that got him elected president. It's also interesting to note, and I haven't heard anybody talk much about this, Joe Biden lives in Delaware. He represented Delaware in the Senate. Delaware is the first state in the Union because they were the first state to approve the Constitution.
Right.
Joe Biden will become the first president from Delaware. There's never been Delaware's a fairly small state, although it's got a pretty good sized population considering where it is. But that will be their first president ever. So that's kind of interesting. Tennessee's had 3, although we've never had a president born in our state. All the 3 presidents that we had were born in surrounding states.
Well, so Biden was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
He was born in Pennsylvania, but he's lived most of his life in Delaware.
In Delaware, that's right. He was the senator.
And I think his proximity to Pennsylvania had something to do with him being able to be more credible there. And I think in general, one of the reasons Biden may have pulled this out is that when you had somebody else says he has strong Philly connections, and I'm sure that's true too. He has strong connections inside Pennsylvania. I also think that Biden in general was a little bit more popular, certainly more popular than Hillary Clinton. We had two candidates in 2016 that I heard a lot of people telling me they were voting for what they thought was either the lesser of two evils, or they were holding their nose to vote for either one of them. I didn't hear that as much in this race. Certainly didn't hear it as much about Biden. And I think somehow that might have made a little bit of, not a huge difference, but some difference in the race. And in this case, in some of these states, every little difference made a difference.
Such an interesting time. So, so talk about obviously, there was a talk of a blue wave coming. That didn't happen. I think some people may have been surprised at how close it all was, and how, and then you take a step back and you go, gee whiz, are we this divided in this country? And maybe we are. So from your perspective of watching this over the many years, how do we start trying to fix some of this stuff? You were there the other night at the council, and one of the things I said at the beginning was, we got to start with us. We can't be rude to each other. We need to be professional. We need to act responsibly. How do we start fixing some of this stuff?
Well, I think on an individual basis, it's exactly what you just said. I mean, we all have to take the individual responsibility to, as Howard Baker used to say, that give the other guy some credit. People on the other side might actually have some good ideas, and maybe start looking for some ways that we agree on things. I mean, we all live in our own little bubbles, and you can see that, but because we all have our own little news networks, we go look for things, and we believe anything we see on that network, and we don't believe things we see on the other side's network. So, and that's even more compounded, I think, by what you see in the social media and what goes on Facebook. It goes on within families. I mean, I'm sure we're going to have another tense Thanksgiving, not only because of the pandemic, but because people have different ideas about what they think about what's happened today. And I'll be interested to see, and I hope this is not a problem. So far, I think everybody's been pretty patient and pretty responsible in their responses to the election. Yes, there's been people on both sides get out in protest, but and there have been some taunting and some chanting and some other things like that, but there haven't been any of the things that people were worried about. Some people did wear guns to go to these things, but I haven't seen any violence or bloodshed, thank God, about this. And I hope it continues that way now, that if this is indeed the end of the race and Joe Biden has been declared the victor, and I would have said this had Donald Trump been elected, that you just hope everybody will understand that we are one nation. We are not each other's enemies. We are all Americans and countrymen. And we got to figure out a way to get that done. It's going to take a while. We didn't get, and I think some of it's also wrapped up in the general distrust of government. And some of us on this call are probably old enough to remember when back in the late 50s and early 60s, if you surveyed the people, they'd say, well, I always believe or almost always believe what the government tells me. Well, starting with the Kennedy assassination and going on through Watergate and everything else that's happened since then, the trust in the government is just not there like it used to be. And I even saw an article this week that said the reason the polls were wrong is there's so many people out there that believe in the Anon conspiracy that they'll either lie or not tell people what they think about who they're going to vote for, and that's why the numbers were off. I don't know. I hate to think that the world's going to be ruled by conspiracy theories, but in the days when everybody has about all the knowledge of the world on their hip with their phones, and that's both good and bad. They have information. They have complete access to information and disinformation at the same time. And they may interpret the way they interpret the information may be totally different than the way I do, but we got to figure out a way to maybe come up with a new language to talk to each other, because the current language ain't working real well.
We're all, I really do believe that it starts individually, and then it grows to groups. So my younger brother talked to me on Thursday before the council meeting, and said it needs to start with you, and you need to tell other people that people need to work together. So just reminded that we just, assuming all this is correct and all the votes come in, this country just elected its first female vice president.
It's true. That's right.
So it's an historic day. It was an historic day when he picked her as his running mate, and it's an historic day today. So let me switch over to talk a little bit about Tennessee. So didn't change all that much. I'm not sure if I'm not even sure if the House really changed at all. I think it may be exactly the same because there was the race in Memphis in Shelby County where John DeBerry, who was the Democrat, ran as he was taken off as a Democrat. He ran as an independent, but he was defeated by a Democrat. So I think the numbers in the House stayed the same. The only change would have been in the Senate with the election of Heidi Campbell as the state senator who beat Steve Dickerson here in Nashville. I mean, just from looking at it, I didn't think I was going to see a big change in Tennessee, and there wasn't. Did you expect anything different?
No, I didn't. I think I said on Channel 5 election night that it may be tumultuous all across the country and there may be change going on in other states, but Tennessee is not a part of that. Ours was, in that regard, kind of a boring election if you were looking for a lot of close races because we didn't have one. We were not like that at all.
No, it didn't seem like anything. Yeah, I mean, the more things may have changed around us, everything basically stayed the same here. Any call? Did you expect to see Heidi Campbell beat Dickerson? Just from
I kind of did for a couple of different reasons. First of all, he very late in the campaign, he was getting some help, although I'm not sure it turned out to be help from his colleagues and Republican colleagues in the Senate. They ran one set of attack ads, primarily saying that she was for the mob and her support for Gideon's Army was somehow bad, although Gideon's Army has a very different reputation inside Nashville, so that probably didn't help. But the whole second round of attack ads, which came very late, in fact, they didn't really get there until we got into the actual, make sure you can still see me, because I think, there I am. Okay, I think I'm back.
Yeah, I've got you. Yeah.
The late ads were attacking her for not paying her property taxes on time, for having a couple DUIs from some years ago. And when you see somebody get attacked that late, you don't do an attack ad at all unless you think that you need to knock somebody down or hold back their momentum. So that was pretty much a pretty good indication to me that they thought, or at least the Republicans thought in the Senate, that she was winning. Also, that district voted for Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. And again, because this is a presidential year, I suspect, I haven't looked at the actual precincts in that Senate district, but I suspect they voted for Joe Biden even more so, because I know he carried this county by more than 2-1. And so that was probably more of a tidal wave than he could overcome, even though he tried to run his campaign to say, vote for the person, not the party. But I don't think it was enough to do that for him. If you had taken Steve Dickerson's record in the 8 years he was in the Senate, and you look and you just put it up on a blind test and said, is this senator a Republican or a Democrat? There might be a lot of people who think he was a Democrat, because he supported legislation like medical marijuana that Democrats support, Republicans don't. In fact, it's interesting that the Senate Republicans made as big a push to get Steve Dickerson reelected, and the reason he couldn't pass his major issue, which was medical marijuana, was primarily because the Republicans in the Senate wouldn't vote for it. He couldn't get it to the floor up there. And of course, he didn't get it through the House either, but it was the Republicans in general who opposed that kind of change, even though most states in the country have now done that. I noticed that Heidi Campbell says that's going to be one of the things that she's trying to push. I wish her luck. I think that is a bill that is sort of slowly taking time to get to where it's going to get the votes in a conservative state like Tennessee. And while you see states like Georgia, North Carolina, even Kentucky that are a little bit more blue in the last few cycles than Tennessee. Tennessee continues to get a little bit more red, because it was interesting to note that Bill Hagerty and Donald Trump almost got the same percentage of the vote across the state, about 61%, which I think was slightly larger than Trump got 4 years ago. So we're pretty solidly in that direction. And obviously Hagerty hung his hat on being the person endorsed for the U.S. Senate by Donald Trump. And that helped him win the primary, helped him win the general election, and they were almost in lockstep for the number of votes they got in the state on the same night.
So I will say that Councilmember Gloria Hauser has also joined us. Just a couple more questions. All right, so now that, Well, let me stay with the state for one more question, then I'll go back to the national election. What do you see in 2 years? Obviously, we'll have a governor's race. We will not have a United States Senate race. Things basically are the same in Tennessee in terms of this election. You see any change coming, or you think, what do you think Governor Lee will be? I assume he's already said he's running for re-election. Things stay the same for the next couple of years?
Well, given where we are in Tennessee for Governor Lee's re-election, the number one thing you have to look at is, will he have a primary opponent on the Republican side? The Democrats need to find a candidate to run against Governor Lee. I don't know who that person would be right now. Maybe there'll be time for something to emerge, but the best Democratic candidate in any of the statewide races the last several years has been Phil Bredesen, and he did not do very well in the Senate race against Marsha Blackburn, primarily because that race got nationalized over the Supreme Court, and at the time the concern about the caravans coming up from South America, which as far as I know kind of disappeared after the election was over. Phil Bredesen's not going to come back and run for governor again, so I don't think that's going to happen. So they're going to have to find a candidate there. I think where Governor Lee is right now, there are some people who are not as crazy about him. In some ways, there were things about how he got elected, at least won the primary 2 years ago, that were a little bit different. The two candidates in front of him in the polling tore each other up with attack ads, and he was the beneficiary of that and wound up winning the nomination. And in those cases, as it would probably still be today, anybody that's got the Republican label in front of them is going to be the ones that's going to get elected governor. Because he was the first governor elected he and Bill Haslam are the first two Republican governors elected back-to-back in over 50 years. So the dominance that's already been in the state legislature and been in the U.S. Senate for the Republicans has now spread to the governor's office. I would say one thing about Governor Lee that I think probably has a lot to do with particularly the mask mandate is that I think he feels like, and I wouldn't disagree with him, that the best way for him to get a well-funded, serious candidate for re-election would be if he put in a mask mandate, because right now, much as you saw in the national exit polling, when people said, are we doing a good job in handling the coronavirus or not, it was 51-49, very close about whether it was good. 51% bad job, 49% good job. At the same time, nationally, they asked the same question about the use of wearing masks. Is it a public health necessity or is it a personal choice? And that was like 70-30 that it was a public health mandate, which is kind of odd that you get those kind of results. But if Bill Lee put in a mask mandate, he'd probably be sure to get himself a pretty strong opponent. So I think he will continue to resist that. Now, maybe after Donald Trump is gone, there'll be a little bit of a modification about that. And you can slowly see people are getting a little bit more used to wanting to wear a mask and are not quite as complaining about it. But how's the rest of this winter going to go? And I know Joe Biden wants to do something about it, but he can't even get in office to do anything about it until January 20th. And we could be well down into an even worse situation because the virus didn't go away last week during the election. In fact, if anything, it got worse across the country. I do think we're seeing a little bit of from what you gave this morning, Jim, for the numbers, we're seeing some improvement. And the mayor's people have been saying that that if now, because some of the surrounding mayors in other counties have put back mask mandates in, that's going to help Davidson County. But not having it across the state still puts us in a little bit of a more difficult situation and puts our hospital system in a bigger push, because a lot of the people that are in hospitals in Davidson County, whether it's for the virus or anything else, come from other counties. So, I think it is going to be a tough winter, and we'll just see, particularly not only in Tennessee, but across the nation, how we're going to be able to address this and get this under control. Because the vaccine, if it gets here, is not going to get here until probably spring, maybe even into the summer before we start getting it out. And then I'm sure there'll be controversies and issues about who gets done first and how that's going to work and how quickly it happens.
All right, last question, because I know everybody, I know you want to get back to the television, start looking, and so do I. So we'll end a little bit early today. But the last question is, what do you expect, since we've had some of the networks now call the election? What do you expect? What do you expect in the next couple of days? And I know there'll be some legal stuff going on, but what do you expect?
Well, I expect first that President-elect Joe Biden will make another address to the country. He'll say a lot of the things that he said before. I think he's been saying this throughout the process to set himself in contrast to the president, who has been much more rambling and full of a lot of baseless accusations. I think he wants to show himself as being more presidential. I think he's accomplished it. I also think he said what he's been saying because this is a way for him to be able to say, look, I want to be the president for everybody in the country. I don't want to be the president just for the people who elected me, and the rest of the other people can just go figure it out on their own. I think you'll see some backlash from some of the Trump people who'll be unhappy about it. You'll probably, if we haven't already checked his Twitter feed, I suspect the president's already gone ballistic about the whole thing. I think there'll continue to be some legal battles. I think the real question now is going to be, particularly as other states are called, but Pennsylvania was the biggest key state. So we've gotten to the point now where Biden's over enough of 270 that if indeed that call is valid, and I suspect, I hope the people in Pennsylvania, the election officials, aren't going to come out now and say, I hope, because I just don't think that it would be a bad situation if the Pennsylvania officials came back and said, no, we don't think we're ready. We wouldn't make that call yet. We're not saying the votes for Biden. That would probably be bad. That's certainly one possibility. So we'll see how it goes. I think eventually we may get down, if the president continues to double down, and that has been his MO on just about everything on the 4 years he's been in office. We may have to get to a Goldwater moment where Mitch McConnell in particular and others in the Senate, the Republicans, go to the president as Barry Goldwater and the Republicans in the Senate did to Richard Nixon back in 1974 to say, Mr. President, it's time to go. It's time to say it's over. Rise above the problems. Make a speech like so many candidates do when they lose. Usually that's the best speech they make in their entire career. But whether that happens or not, I don't know. But I think now we're going to move towards some resolution. Let's hope it does not have such a bad backlash that we're going to have some problems. But I think we'll see Biden starting to come in to do that. We'll start to see him going through the transition. I think he already had a website up to try to talk about that. I think he'll start putting that into process. We might start seeing, if it goes for a couple of weeks, we'll start seeing people meeting with him and cabinet appointments being made. And that could be the next flashpoint in the new Congress, particularly if the Republicans take over and still stay in control of the Senate. The Senate has to confirm cabinet appointments. And Mitch McConnell could make that very difficult if the Republicans still have control of the Senate, although it's going to be very razor thin across the board. Because no party, even if Democrats win both seats in Georgia, it's going to be basically a tie, maybe 1 or 2 seats difference at the most. And it'll just be interesting to see how it all works out. So I think this is in some of the uncertainty that's out there, but it probably doesn't end the controversy or the fact that it's still 2020 for a couple of months.
Well, Pat, thank you for being my guest. I know certainly an interesting discussion today. We'll see where all this stuff goes. I appreciate you being on. And we were doing this, and an election was called, a national election was called right in the middle of the show. So we were both a part of it at the same time.
Well, thank you, Jim. I appreciate being invited. And this is an interesting group. So I appreciate being part of the people who are here. So is your future in politics to be a political host on the show or something like this? You're going to keep doing? You can take this into the media too?
Well, I don't know what we're going to do. All I know is that we started with the idea that people were at home during a pandemic and we could provide some information, and that's what we continue to do. We'll see. As long as people are learning and enjoying it and getting something out of it, we might just keep doing it.
Well, TV programs have come out of national crises. The Nightline show on ABC years ago came out of the Iran hostage crisis.
Yeah, I remember that.
The morning edition show on NPR started as a part of of that same process. And they started, and after it was over, they continued the process. So you may have started something that will live on after, from my mouth to God's ears, the pandemic finally ends.
Well, no one has called me yet, so I'll let you know as soon as somebody does.
Well, the good thing about doing it by Zoom is you don't have the overhead costs that you usually have if you're on a radio station or a TV station.
That is true. So we may just see how far we go with this thing. Anyway, thank you again. We weren't sure what was going to happen with the election, so we held next Saturday kind of open. We'll let you know what we do with that for those who usually watch. who knows? We're not sure what's going on, but we're all going to go to the television set as soon as we all get off this Zoom call.
Yeah, I have had an email from the Hill publication that indicates that Biden is one, but I don't think that means they projected it. I think they're probably just reporting that MSNBC has done it. But I'll look and see if anybody else has followed suit. And I think that's probably what I would urge everybody else to do, because right now that's just one other media outlet making a decision. It's an important one, but we'll see if that's where everybody else goes or if we have still more controversy.
Well, anyway, thanks for being on. Thanks everybody for listening. Everybody have a good, it looks like Fox has just called it as well.
Okay.
So,
well, that will surely send the president to orbit.
Well, we will all be in touch in the next week or so. Anyway, everybody have a great weekend. It's a beautiful day outside, and everybody stay safe. Pat, have a good one. Thanks for being our guest.
Same to you, Jim. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Signing off.